Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94 here, back with another reaction video. Today, we finna react to WWE Velocity retrospective. Hey, man, Sunday Night Heat was something, but Velocity was that show, bro. Especially on Saturdays on UPN. The shit used to come on. Goated. Goated. Velocity is goated. I used to love watching Velocity. But anyways, though, without further ado, let's get right into it.
With the WWF's brand extension first going into effect in April of 2002, the company's roster would now be split and assigned to either Raw or SmackDown exclusively. Now with the main shows featuring exclusive rosters, the company's weekend programming would also be changed, so that each brand could have a B show, or a lower tier show, to replay major moments from that week's episode, and provide a platform for talent that were often appearing on Mondays or Thursdays. Sunday Night Heat would now be taped prior to Raw, while SmackDown would have a bit of a shift with its program. Originally Metal, or Jacked depending on when and where the show aired, would be taped prior to SmackDown and showcase the other stars of the Blue brand for several weeks through syndication. But it would soon be replaced in favor of an entirely new look and name, now going by Velocity, with the idea and presentation focusing on intense, high-speed action of the SmackDown superstars, to go along with the recaps of the major matches or angles from the previous Thursday. Instead of broadcasting this new program through its already syndicated time slots, it would air Saturday nights on the same channel as Monday Night Raw, TNN, as the previous show in that late time slot, Access, didn't gain the traction that was expected and would soon be replaced with two separate hour-long programs. Confidential, which was a show that featured pieces on superstars and legends outside of the ring or covered the hottest topics on the main shows, as well as the aforementioned Velocity, which on the East Coast aired from 10 to 11 p.m. The first episode of Velocity aired on May 25, 2002, and featured Billy Kidman defeating Tajiri in the opener thanks to a distraction from Tori Wilson, Hardcore Holly defeating Val Venus, and in the main event, Trish Stratus retained her Women's Championship against Stacy Keibler in a bra and panties rematch from their encounter at Judgment Day the previous Sunday. This would be the only time the Women's Championship would ever be defended on Velocity, as it, along with the Undisputed and Tag Team Championships, were allowed to float between both shows in the early days of the brand split, before becoming exclusive to Raw later in the year. Velocity continued to feature lower card talent with a mix of cruiserweight wrestlers such as Billy Kidman, Chavo Guerrero, and Tajiri, or established names such as Val Venus, The Godfather, or Reverend Devon. The show also featured the WWE debuts of Jamie Noble and Nydia, Shannon Moore, and even featured TNA and NXT champion Bobby Roode. Throughout the summer, Mike also would emerge on the show after returning from an injury he had suffered the previous November, but was often on the losing end of matches against Farouk, Mark Henry, and later Funaki, before getting released by WWE in late September. Another name worth mentioning for their time on the show includes Albert, who became such a regular on Velocity, he proclaimed himself to be Velocity's #1 prisoner, and would get a push as a powerhouse monster, defeating his opponents both during and after matches to send a message. Throughout his run, Albert also let his body hair grow out, especially on his back, which led to the fans often chanting "shave your back" at him during his matches or promos. But Albert believed that it was actually a turn-on for the female fans in attendance and wasn't planning on shaving it off anytime soon.
Hell no.
He would eventually be featured again on SmackDown in December, attacking Rey Mysterio after a match, and would continue his push on the Blue brand, now under a new name, A-Train. John Cena is another name that was regularly featured during this time period. After his initial debut, full of ruthless aggression that started to fizzle out a bit, John would spend some time on the B show, getting victories over Devon, Albert, and Chavo Guerrero, sometimes with a small package or a roll-up. and whenever he was featured on SmackDown, the former prototype would often take the loss, including him and Billy Kidman losing in the WWE Tag Team Championship tournament. And while this particular loss did help fuel his eventual heel turn against Kidman the following week, this new version of John Cena certainly wasn't lighting the world on fire. But thanks to him rapping in an Elvis costume at the backstage Halloween party several weeks later, his career trajectory would be changed forever. And while John would start to find success again, bouncing back and forth between Velocity and SmackDown soon after, seeing this brief transition period is honestly fascinating to look back on. Within a year after being called up to the main roster, John went from trying to figure out what his identity and character was to becoming the Doctor of Thugonomics and, in doing so, becoming one of the most popular stars on SmackDown and arguably in the entire company. Heading into 2003, Mattitude became a featured part of the program, as Matt Hardy version 1 would join the mix of other talent, including retaining his Cruiserweight Championship multiple times against Funaki, facing his own Mattitude follower Shannon Moore, and also taking on ECW star Nova in a non-title match. And funnily enough, both men would also have an obscure footnote in the history of Velocity, but we'll touch back on that one later. It was also during this time that Mattitude would gain a new follower, as Crash Holly would join Matt and Shannon in April, with V1 later referring to Crash as a moron, one because of the obvious pun, but also because of the two regularly teaming together in matches soon after. The final match to feature both MFers took place on the June 21st episode, as thanks to Matt Hardy negotiating with Shaniqua, they lost to the Basham brothers in the main event, with Crash being released from his WWE contract on the 30th. A few more debuts took place early into the year, including Ring of Honor star Xavier making a few appearances, often being defeated by Chuck Palumbo, Bill DeMott, and Spanky. The show also featured Bryan Danielson. In his first two matches on the show, Bryan would first take a loss to Jamie Noble on the January 11th episode, but would return on February 8th to take on one John Cena, still trying to figure out what exactly the meaning of word life was. This match was a more technical and ruthless back and forth encounter, mostly to show off John's newfound aggression to go along with his relatively new character, with Cena also picking up the victory over Bryan Danielson. And while many wouldn't have considered it at the time, this match would end up being a showcase for the early careers of two men who a decade later would go on to become the biggest stars in WWE, and would even face off against each other in the main event of that year's SummerSlam for the company's top title. This match is also noteworthy for being the first featured match in Daniel Bryan's showcase mode in WWE 2K19. The second half of the year featured Ultimo Dragon, APA, and the full-blooded Italians being added into the mix of talent on Velocity, with enhancement guys featuring Team Canada members Bobby Roode and Eric Young, Ken Kennedy Anderson, and future tag team champion Joey Matthews, better known later on as Joey Mercury. And another tag team would also start during the tail end of 2003, as Spanky started teaming with Paul London, as they would face a mix of local talent and established teams on SmackDown, including the FBI and the World's Greatest Tag Team. For 2004, this was arguably when the hidden gem era of the show began, as you'd start to find matches sprinkled throughout the calendar year that at times would often exceed the in-ring action on the major weekly shows, with only a fraction of the time being given. This first starts on the March 20th episode, as after winning the Cruiserweight Open and retaining his title at WrestleMania 20, Chavo Guerrero would defend his title in a singles match against one of the men he defeated at Madison Square Garden, Ultimo Dragon. Chavo repeatedly tried to keep Dragon grounded in the ring, but the former J-Crown champion would slip through and use his speed and experience to make a comeback, even hitting the Dragon Sleeper on Chavito. But a distraction from Chavo Sr. would help his son to hit the gory special and retain his Cruiserweight title once again. This would end up being the penultimate match of Ultimo Dragon's WWE run, with him losing to Nunzio on the April 17th Velocity before getting his release after several pitches to remove Ultimo's mask fell through. The Cruiserweights continued to remain a constant highlight of Velocity, with a perfect example being a number 1 contenders match on April 10th between Nunzio, Akio, Billy Kidman, and Rey Mysterio. The match remained fast-paced, with all 4 men constantly cutting each other off and showing off their high-flying abilities. A lot of incredible sequences that would lead to many springboard attacks and near-fall attempts eventually ends with Nunzio getting the pin and earning himself a future title shot. I highly recommend checking this match out in full because frankly I don't think my brief description of everything that went down really does do it enough justice. A name you probably wouldn't associate with Velocity would be John Bradshaw Layfield, but during the early days of the character's push on SmackDown, he would wrestle 2 final matches on the show. The first occurring on the May 1st episode, defeating a bloody Funaki in the main event. The other taking place near the start of what would end up being a lengthy reign with the WWE Championship, as he beat Shannon Moore in a non-title match on July 31st. Funaki and Spike Dudley would main event the September 4th episode for the Cruiserweight Championship after a WWE.com interview between the two quickly got hostile. Funaki would stay fired up throughout the majority of the bout, with the boss of the Dudleys having to throw in some cheap shots to try and gain some momentum. The former member of Kai En Tai would attempt several covers but kept coming up short. But after making a comeback and setting up the Tornado DDT in the corner, Spike would cut him off and hit the Dudley Dog to retain, without needing any assistance or interference from Bubba Ray and Devon to get the job done. Arguably the best feud that took place on Velocity towards the tail end of 2004 was between Akio and Paul London. The two would have a series of great matches over the next several months that continued to get better with each encounter. First starting on December 4th, with London getting the win over the future Jimmy Wang Yang. Akio would return the favor on January 15th, 2005, getting the win with a corkscrew moonsault. London would get a victory back over Akio several weeks later in Japan, but the rivalry would finally come to an end on the March 12th episode, as the two rivals faced off in a number 1 contenders match for Chavo's Cruiserweight Championship, which saw London not only end the feud with Akio, but also earn himself a chance to become the Cruiserweight Champion. As a result of the draft lottery in the summer of 2005, Chris Benoit and William Regal were a part of those that would move over from Raw to SmackDown. And with the two already having a history competing in Japan, WCW, and at the Brian Pillman Memorial Show, both men would face off once again on the July 16th episode of Velocity. This was a very technical encounter, as the former Intercontinental Champions had an answer to every bit of offense that they could give. Benoit would eventually take the ruthless advantage, including busting open Regal with some headbutts, before the real man's man would try to wear him down with several submissions. But the rabid Wolverine would eventually lock in the crossface, and Regal would have to tap out immediately as he wouldn't be able to outlast the pain that had already been inflicted onto him. I'd also recommend checking out this match in particular, as I felt it told a great story between two men who have known each other well enough in the ring over the years, continuing to push each other beyond their limits, with it getting even more ruthless and calculating towards the end. Velocity would go through a massive change later into the year, as with Monday Night Raw moving back to the USA Network in the fall, both Velocity and Sunday Night Heat would wrap up on the former TNN, now Spike TV. But neither show would get moved into the weekend schedule on USA, instead broadcasting digitally on WWE.com for the remainder of their airings, while continuing in its regular time slots for other markets. The later half of 2005 featured more appearances from former and future stars of the business, with the July 25th show featuring Frankie Kazarian defeating Scotty 2 Hotty, former ECW Tag Team Champions Danny Doring and Roadkill losing to Eminem, and the December 13th episode, which featured both Jamie Noble defeating Tommaso Whitney, who would re-emerge years later with a different last name and become a black card of sorts within WWE, and Doug Basham defeating Todd Hansen, nowadays a Viking Raider and has since gone on to become a featured part of Monday Night Raw. During the final months of Velocity's run, the infamous Juniors division would also make a few appearances on the show. Originally planned as a way to add some life back into the company's cruiserweight division, several mini wrestlers were instead brought in and treated as a comedy act on SmackDown, and limiting what they were capable of doing in the ring. Masquerita Sagrada would defeat Octagon Sito on February 18th, then defeating Suki the following week, before all the mini wrestlers would get released in early March. One last match that's worth mentioning took place on the March 18th, 2006 episode, as another four-way number one contenders match took place between London, Brian Kendrick, Noble, and Kid Cash. All four men have faced off against each other before in tag team action a few months prior on Velocity, but now all members of the Hooligans and Pitbulls would face each other to earn a title shot against Gregory Helms. Much like the Fatal 4-Way from a few years prior, all the guys involved use a mix of strong-style offense and high-diving moves to take each other out, including a pretty damn-looking Tower of Doom spot, with Paul London pinning his own partner Brian Kendrick to become the number one contender, but there's no hard feelings between the two after the bell. Velocity's run would soon come to an end, as with the upcoming relaunch of ECW as the third brand alongside Raw and SmackDown. The new show would replace Velocity, airing live on Tuesdays to go along with the taping of that week's SmackDown. The final episode aired on June 10th, 2006, and featured Tatanka defeating Seth James, Colt Cabana appearing to take the loss to Gunner Scott, right when Gunner was getting a brief push on the main roster. The Pitbulls would defeat some local enhancement talent, and in the show's final main event, Matt Hardy would defeat Simon Dean, the former Nova who had faced off against Matt 3 years earlier on the show. And after a run that lasts a little over 4 years, Velocity officially comes to an end. At first, Velocity seems like a show that really wasn't worth paying attention to, as it was essentially a recap of SmackDown with some bonus matches all squeezed in within an hour. But when you look more into what happened on particular episodes, it often featured matches that would exceed those on the major weekly shows or even the monthly pay-per-views without any major build-up, storylines that either carried continuity from Thursdays or were exclusive to the program and would help give lower card talent some TV time and further build them up for the bigger stage later on, or became a platform for guys who at first emerged as local wrestlers and developmental talent to put over the more established names, but would go on to become bigger stars for WWE several years later, and would often have these matches acknowledged by the company as hidden gems for it being their earliest appearances. Unfortunately, or unsurprisingly by this point, WWE themselves will only put out a handful of episodes onto their streaming services, but most of the show's catalog is available on YouTube through different channels, including Hollow Riched, who's been uploading episodes of Velocity and Sunday Night Heat, minus all the recaps, up to late 2004 as of the time of recording. And although I covered a good portion of the show's history in this video, I still recommend checking out Velocity on its own if you're able to, because there may be another rare appearance or even another hidden gem worthy match that's just waiting to be rediscovered.
Alrighty, man. In my personal opinion, Velocity hit harder than Sunday Night Heat. And I don't know about where y'all live, but where I live, we used to get this on UPN. They used to show this on UPN back in the day. Where I live, they showed this on UPN late at night around like 10:30, 10 o'clock-ish. And I always enjoyed the matches that we would get from this. That's why I fuck with Velocity more. Like Sunday Night Heat was cool, but it wasn't fucking with Velocity. It's like Velocity, they had better wrestlers. I wouldn't say they had better wrestlers, but the wrestlers that they put on Velocity, they gave a damn. Cause they was trying to get on TV. So they would show out on Velocity, bro. For real. That's just me though. But anyway, so that's just gonna about do it for this one, man. So we went over Sunday Night Heat. We went over Velocity, man. Is it safe to say we go over ECW, the WWE ECW? Is it safe to say we do that one? Because it's looking like we may have to, bro. It's a bunch of defunct WWE shows. Like the most recent one being NXT Level Up. I know that one's defunct as of now. That stopped in 2024. It didn't follow into 2025 because NXT moved to CW. So NXT Level Up is no longer a thing. So may have to go over that. There's also WWE 205, the Cruiserweight division. There's that. Then there's NXT UK. There's that. There's so many defunct episodes of defunct shows. I think it was another show too that came along with WWE Main Event. Cause there's Main Event. Main Event is still going though. Main Event is still going, but it was another show too to go alongside with Main Event, and I forgot what it was, but I know that got canceled. But anywho, that's just gonna about do it for this one. I'll see y'all in the next video. Till then, peace out.